Yeah, my name's James. I'm an alcoholic.
James.
Wanted to thank Eric and the group for having me and for buying me dinner tonight. And also thanks to Bowie and Laura for their reports. Laura mentioned something about that plain language version of the big book. When I was from about a year and a half to 3.5 years sober, I was the GSR for my now home group. And Renee was the delegate at the time. And we were going through that plain language big book thing, and my group was very opposed to it because we all thought it was going to be some kind of, modern English version of it. And Renee explained to everyone at the pre-conference assembly that's not what it was, and that it was I should note too that conference assembly was also there was sort of a hostile vibe. It was the hot button topic on the agenda for the weekend, and Renee explained it about that it's a linguistic standard. It's the same as translating from English into Spanish or anything else. And the whole point of that plain language version of the book was so that the book would be available for people who are physically isolated from Alcoholics Anonymous, people who live in Alaska or the middle of nowhere in Wyoming or something, and they don't have a meeting to go to, and they didn't have a sponsor to explain the book to them. And by the end of Renee's speech on the point, the meeting voted unanimously to approve. The Area 69 was sending a yes vote on publishing that book. And it was one of my first experiences in AA of watching it happen, of a bunch of people with their own opinions and their own agendas and ideas or whatever, just hearing someone talk and being like, you know what, this is the right way that we should go. And then we all had to go back to our home groups and explain that, which is a little uncomfortable, but it seems like everybody got it. So, it's just funny when Laura mentioned that popped right into my head. Anyway, by way of introduction, I'm about 9.5 years sober. This sobriety date is January 19th of 2015. I have a home group, the City at 7 meeting that meets here in Salt Lake at Fit to Recover on Saturday nights at 7. I have a sponsor. I meet with him every Monday night that he's not working, face-to-face, sit across from him at his kitchen table. I sponsor guys. I mentioned I have a home group. I have a service position in that group at my sponsor's suggestion. And I think I've been without a sponsor for a total of about 2 hours in the last 9.5 years. And that was a sketchy 2 hours. I'm not that funny, so if you hear something that seems like a joke, feel free to laugh. What time should I be wrapping up?
45 minutes to an hour.
Great.
Or you can be as short or long as you want.
Okay. Brevity is not my strong suit, but I'll try and keep it together here. The first time I got sober was in March of 2014. I'm going to back up on that a little bit. I really don't want to talk about what I think, because I found that what I think has almost nothing to do with Alcoholics Anonymous. My experience was, starting as a kid, I felt like something was missing. Like there was just one or two pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that I couldn't put together. And I don't know if alcoholism is a hereditary kind of genetic thing, or if it's something the book suggests that, people can cross a line and become alcoholics. I don't know. I don't care, really. What I do know is that I was really uncomfortable as a kid. I was kind of on the verge of maybe considering suicide by the time I got into high school. And I found punk rock music was the first thing that pulled me back from that. And that didn't last that long because I was still Mormon. And the feeling that like I'd found this new kind of community and this worldview and these politics that really vibed with me, I was still an outsider, right? Because all these other guys were partying really hard. And I don't know if they really looked at me this way, but I felt like they were looking at me like, this guy's not really one of us, And I rode that initial kind of pink cloud of starting to play in bands and stuff for a little while. And then I got back to kind of a dark place. And I had met this girl my senior year of high school who was way out of my league, just stunningly beautiful and really smart. And by the end, right after we graduated, we were at a party and I was willing to do anything I needed to do to continue having access to her time and body. And we were at this house and they were drinking Southern Comfort mixed with Mountain Dew Code Red, and everything was warm. And I had a couple of those, and that was also the night I lost my virginity, so it was a big day for me. And I was like, okay, well, I've crossed this bridge now. I kind of had meandered my way out of the LDS faith of my youth at this point. And that, I was like, okay, that door's closed. I'm going this way now. And I wasn't that pumped about the drinking part of it. It was the booze itself was not that tasty. And I spent the rest of the summer here and there doing the same, 18-year-old kind of things. Warm Milwaukee's Best and stolen bottles of E&J brandy and that sort of stuff. And I never really got drunk for the first about 6 months. And then I went to a Halloween party. It was October of 2001 with my older brother and a bunch of his friends. And one of the things I got to make this make sense here. I've got two older brothers. The oldest one had gone on a mission and was really straight-laced. This brother had finished high school early, and his primary purpose was to snowboard and skateboard. That was the stuff that he cared about. And all of his other friends were also these kind of local B-level pro snowboarders and skateboarders. And the women that they were hanging out with were also professional athletes and or models. And I walk into this party and I'm just like, there is no reason for me to be here. I just felt about this tall, And a guy that I was working with at this snowboard shop at the time, he knew that I had kind of started drinking, and this is a pre-Fireball story for those of you that drank Fireball. He brought me a pint of 100 proof cinnamon schnapps. It was called Hot Damn. And that was way better than Southern Comfort and Mountain Dew. And I polished that off along with, about a half a dozen out-of-state Budweisers. This was when out-of-state beer meant something. And it happened, right? The thing that makes me bodily and mentally different from my fellows occurred to me. I felt like I had every right to be at this party, that I was just in line with these people and I could talk to these girls, and I tried dancing a little, which was regrettable, but I had a great time. It was the best night of my life. And about 1 or 2 in the morning, my brother was like, hey, you probably ought to stop drinking if you're going to drive home tonight, maybe sleep for an hour or two. And I did that, and I drove home at 4 a.m. and I woke up at 7 and I went to work, and I'm kind of weighing what had happened on my way into my job, and I was like, this was the best thing that's ever happened to me, and there are no consequences, no price was paid. And I chased that feeling for the next 14 years. And this what it was like part of my drinking career, I should mention, I borrow pretty heavily from speaker tapes. So if you hear something that sounds like I'm stealing from Earl H. or Bob D. or Joe and Charlie, I am. There is no intellectual property in AA, right? There's no misappropriation. That's the whole point of what we're doing, is you take what's working for other people and try and work it for yourself. But the Earl H. thing is that his life was fun with problems, right? And that was my experience to a T. I made it through undergrad. The bands I was playing in had more local, regional success. It's nothing that any of you would want to listen to or likely have heard of, and that's just fine. It's not like a hipster comment. We're just not that good. So I'm playing in bands, I'm going to school, I'm working at this really awesome mountain bike shop that was back before mountain biking really hit the big time, and it was a custom boutique shop where we would order a frame and fork and wheels and build everything, and we had a World Cup race team, and manufacturers were calling us for advice, and it was just a really fun time in my life. And I met another girl, and very drunkenly one night we decided we should get married, and I finished school. I did pretty well in college, and we applied to graduate schools and moved off to New Jersey. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that's kind of where fun with problems started. So I finished law school. Didn't do that well, but I finished. And when you're in graduate school right now, with the way student loans are structured, you have a lot of disposable money. And they told us at orientation, don't spend all your money or you'll be poor for the rest of your life, which turns out they were right. So I had moved from Utah where, beer is weak and they count out how many ounces of alcohol are in your cocktail and the bars close at 1 and you can't buy anything on Sunday, unless you're at a bar. And I moved to New Jersey where the first time I ordered a Jack and Coke, it was a 16-ounce tumbler and he's like, Jack and Coke. I was like, perfect. Welcome home, man. And the bars in Jersey don't close till 3. The bars in Manhattan do not close. And I had money and I just, the part in the book where Bill says I had arrived because he was making money, I was like, I've arrived because I'm in New York and can drink as much as I want. It was about that time I also discovered a drug called Adderall, also known as methamphetamine. And that was, people were using it to study, and I would buy all the extras after the exams were over so that I could party harder. Anyway, marriage isn't going that great. We go to see a counselor the first summer that we come home, and we're talking about our issues, and my wife is like, you drink too much, I don't see you. And so we make this plan of I get 1 day a week where I'm just like, I just need to blow off some steam. I want to go out with these new friends. And so one night a week, I can go out, no questions asked. And the very first week that we're back in New Jersey, the first Wednesday, whatever it was, Wednesday was my drinking night. It's a good sign. I'm at the bar at like 11 o'clock and I get a text from my wife like, where are you? And I write back like, it's my night, we have this agreement. And I immediately was like, okay, she broke the agreement, I'm out. Like, I'm free to do whatever I want. That's as far as I thought it through, right? So that's what I continued to do, was study enough to pass and then party the way I wanted to party. And unsurprisingly, I did not get a great job in New York City when I graduated. And we kind of wanted to move home. We were kind of excited that we had escaped Salt Lake, but we missed our families and stuff. And so we moved back here, and I got a job at a firm. And I thought, since I hadn't been able to be punk rock as a musician, I could be more punk rock by suing police officers. And I hated it. It was awful. And so that led into more like, I'm back with my old friends. I don't like my job. My marriage is on the rocks, and it's just more excuses to keep drinking. And the Adderall thing now is becoming I have to do it in order to stay awake long enough to drink the way that I want to drink. I tried it by itself a couple times, and I just ground my teeth and smoked a lot of cigarettes. I wasn't that into it. But it was like I could take an extended release one on Saturday morning and be able to go hard until 1 or 2. And then you have 20 minutes to get home before you black out and piss yourself when the Adderall starts wearing off. But that, like, somewhere in there, my wife is like, I am out of here. I'm supposed to study for the bar exam. I take 6 weeks off to take the course, and then, it's a 3-week course and then 3 weeks of studying. I go to the first night of the study course and do not go to any of the other nights and just drink. Go to my friends' houses, I'm going to the bar or whatever, and failed bar exam. My boss, bless his heart, is like, well, it's probably because you went to school out of state. It's not why. He's like, come back to work. The next exam's in 6 months. We'll do the same thing. We'll pay you half time, take the time off, and then when you pass the exam, you'll be on as an attorney here. And the exact same thing happened. Went to the first night of the prep course, didn't go to any more nights, just got hammered for 6 weeks. And I think that second time I came home one night and my wife was gone. And I remember when I came home and she was out of the house, I was standing in my kitchen like this, because now I have no oversight. There's no one trying to pull me back into what the hell are you doing with your life stuff. I'm just like, it's just me now. I can do whatever I want. That's about where Fun with Problems ends. That exam, I think, was the summer of 2013. And I didn't really get another job for about 6 months. I was stealing from my family. I was borrowing money from is it borrowing if you don't pay it back? Also, asking my parents to help me out with stuff. I'm kind of doing the same thing with my friends, and I'm just drinking pretty much all day, every day. In between college and grad school, I'd gotten this job as a hardwood flooring technician, and about 6 months into unemployment, I get a call from them, and they're like, hey, we heard that you are back in Salt Lake. Would you consider coming back to work for us in the office? And I'm looking at my negative $400 bank account, and I was like, yeah, I'll think about it, you know. So I roll in there, and my old boss is at his desk, and he's drinking a glass of warm gin, and he's like, you want a drink? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. When would you like me to start? You know, I think this is going to work out just fine. So I got that job, and at this point, it's really just booze. And I know, like, we talk about what it means to be a low-bottom alcoholic. I didn't know what any of that stuff was. Like, I still have a job, I have an apartment, I had a car. I had 2 cars, actually. They were both old, an old Subaru and an old BMW, but I was like, I got a BMW, you know? It cost about $5,000 a year to keep it running. It was just a piece of shit. But anyway, so I get this job, and at this point, my drummer from the punk band had been sober for about 4 or 5 years, and I ran into him somewhere, just like a friend's birthday party or a funeral or something. And we're talking, and he said, I'm worried about you. And I was like, what are you worried about, man? Like, I'm doing this new job back at Signature, and I have an apartment, and we're doing band stuff again. Like, everything's going pretty good. And he's like, yeah, I'm still worried about you. And I was like, this 12-step guy, what does he know, really? And a few months later, March of 2014, it was March 23rd is my sobriety day. On the 22nd of that year was a Saturday. We get paid direct deposit every Thursday. Saturday morning, I'm out of money again. And I'd been drunk for about a week, kind of had gone to work when I felt like it. And I sort of come to at the bar. It's 1 p.m. and my bank account's empty. I'm like, there might be a correlation here between some of my financial hardships and how much I'm spending on booze. I didn't really put it together that I might actually have a problem with drinking because I didn't know what that meant. I'd never looked into it. I'd never tried to quit before, So I'm like, I can manipulate this. I'll call Jared, and I'll tell him I think I have a problem with alcohol, and can I go to an AA meeting with you? And then I will call my parents and cry and tell them I think I have a problem with drinking, but don't worry, I already have it under control. I'm going to AA with Jared. And that's exactly what happened, and my parents wrote me a check for $300 to cover my rent, and I was like, sweet. Really trying to control and manipulate the circumstances of my life, and that was kind of the last time it worked. So anyway, I go to the Sunday night Alano Club meeting with Jared, and he asked to meet me there an hour early. So we get there and we sit down outside, and he's kind of giving me the thumbnail of what it means to be in AA and what you guys do here. And he's like, when you get in there, you're going to see some kind of religious-y stuff on the walls. Don't worry about that. And I walk in, and I'm like, it seems like something I need to worry about. It's everywhere. But I don't flee. I'm like, I have to keep my cover here. So they're going around the room, and it's, I've seen enough AA meetings on TV that when they ask for newcomers, Jared kind of nudges me, and I stand up, and I go, my name's James, and I'm an alcoholic. And I start crying, and I was like, what the hell is going on here? Like, did not see that coming. And it was like moving enough that I was like, well, I'm here. I might as well see like kind of what these guys are doing at the very least. And so I got, you guys seen that movie Captain Phillips about the Somali pirates with Tom Hanks? Like the 3rd or 4th meeting I go to, I got Captain Phillips by a guy named Martin who's like, I'm your sponsor now. I was like, okay, I don't know what that means either. But so I'm going to meetings. I'm hanging. Jared and I are like Saturdays. We're going to speaker meetings mostly, and like then go out to dinner after. And I'm meeting with Martin at his apartment once a week. And I'm kind of like fighting my way through the first 3 steps, and I'm not that excited about talking about God because I closed that door when I started drinking. I don't need religion or a higher power or spirituality or any of that stuff. And Martin, to his credit and to my benefit, was a big book-based member of AA and a big book-based sponsor. And he turned to a page in the book that said, if you're not sure if you're an alcoholic, go drink. And he was like, I think that's probably what you ought to do. This is not advice I recommend for people who have an IV drug problem, because you'll die. But for those of us who just drink primarily, he gave me a very specific task. He said, I want you to go to your favorite bar at the time you normally go and order 2 of your favorite drink. And when you get halfway through the second one, put it down on the table and go home. And I was like, great. If this is what AA is, I could totally do this. So I went to a bar downtown with one of my buddies, and I had enough, I guess, kind of foresight or fear that I at least waited until like 11:30 p.m. So I was like, I can't get into too much trouble in an hour and a half. But I ordered 2 like Steins of Coors Light or whatever they had, and I got halfway through the second one, and I put it down, and I was like, yeah, I could go home, and finished it. And it took me about a month to realize I had failed this test. And Jared, my drummer buddy, like I remember like a day or 2 after that, Earl H. actually was speaking at the Cirque Lodge in Utah County, and he was like, let's go. And I was like, okay, I have been drinking for the last 3 nights, but sure, I'll go with you, you know. But yeah, it took me a few months to realize that like, not only had I failed this test, but the stuff that I had kind of sunk in those 90 to 100 days of my first attempt at getting sober, I was like, you know, if the nature of being an alcoholic means that I wake up in the morning and I say I'm not drinking today, right? I don't get to pick when I start drinking. I was like, I think that might be happening to me, because I had lots of days, both looking backward and then over that summer of 2014 where I was, you know, I'd wake up and just either resolve, or I had important stuff to do, or I was super hungover and I didn't want to put myself through that again. I'd wake up and be like, not drinking today. And by like 2 or 3, my brain would be like, you might have overreacted, dude. You know, you could probably keep it together tonight. So I saw that pattern kind of, and then the other part of our disease, this idea that once you start drinking, all bets are off. That one was very apparent very quickly. I remember a handful of times in my early 20s successfully having 2 beers, and it was miserable. Like I'd have 2, and if that was all I could have, I'd just be pissed. You know, by the time I was 25, I was like, well, I'm either getting hammered or I'm not drinking at all, right? So that stuff starts clicking, and so I start going back to AA meetings, and I'm going to meetings, and I go to drive home from the meeting, and my car would drive itself to the bar. And I'm just like, what is happening here? And I couldn't put together more than about 48 hours of sobriety. And New Year's Eve of 2014 into 15, I'm at a house party, and we decide we want to go downtown. And so we get a Lyft, whatever. And, you know, it shows you the little photo of who your driver's going to be. It's Jared. I'm just like, fuck, you know? And he comes to pick us up, and I'm like, there isn't, because I had thought I had done a pretty good job of hiding that I was drinking from the people that knew I had gotten sober for a brief period of time. And I'm like, there's no hiding it this time. I'm just 3 sheets to the wind. And he had seen it was me. And obviously, you know, if someone calls for a lift, they're not, you know, they're drinking, basically, right? Or at least back then, that's how it was. So he pulls up to the house, and he gets out of the car and knocks on the door. And he just is like, hey, this big smile. And I'm like, hey, man, can you take us down to Poplar, you know? Yeah. Anyway, like, through that holiday season, November, December, and into January, I'm like, I recognize that I had a problem. And increasingly, I'm trying to stop drinking, and I have this new mountain of evidence that's like, you are trying and failing. Like, all that stuff that you were kind of scoffing at the first time you tried to get sober, where you're like, well, I've never tried to drink before until now, and I'm doing it, so what's the big deal, you know? I'm like, this is not working, man. I can't keep it together. And so I'm making these promises during the holiday season, like sending texts out to the handful of friends who would still drink with me, of like, this is it. I'm getting sober after Thanksgiving. I'm getting sober after Christmas. I'm getting sober on New Year's. And in January 2015, my belly button birthday was on a Saturday. And Tuesday of that week, I sent out the same text, right? Like, this weekend's my birthday. I'm getting sober after this, you know? And the next thing I remember from that week is Sunday afternoon. And I'm back at Poplar. I had just ordered a shot and a Stein. And I had the moment of clarity, the first moment of clarity. And this voice in my head is like, dude, if you don't do something about the way you are drinking right now, you are never going to. And I got sort of this flash forward. I was 32 in a day, right? That like I'm not going to die some kind of like exciting, sexy punk rock death soon. I'm 32. I'm in so shape, other than constantly smoking cigarettes and drinking and using Adderall. I got this picture of like, you've got 15 or 20 years of things getting worse. I'm going back to that first party, that first Halloween party, beyond just feeling like everything was good, for the first time maybe ever. I also felt like my life was maybe finally in my own control. In that 7-month first step or 7-month relapse, however I'm looking at it on any given day, there was none of either of those things left. The party was over and the control was gone. I'd never been a guy that was like stumbling drunk, pissing my pants, slurring my speech too much, And those last few months, all that stuff started happening, and I just was, and while that is happening, I'm physically drunker than I have ever been. The spring that Clancy from California talks about is just getting tighter and tighter, and there's no relief left. There's no party. And so I'm back at, well, maybe I ought to just put a gun in my mouth, So having that moment of clarity on January 18th of 2015, I was scared enough to call my parents and be like, hey, I need help, right? And I get up to their house. My parents had made a birthday dinner for me that I was 3 hours late to and super drunk. And I'm like, hey, I've been drinking. And my family's like, yeah, we know. He didn't really hide it that well. My dad's a doctor, and he's like, it doesn't really seem like you're going through the DTs. Tomorrow morning, we're going to call this treatment center and see about getting you in. And my brain is like, no way, not going to treatment. And my mouth just goes, okay. It's like, well, all right. And so sleep it off a little bit. The next morning, they wake me up, and my dad's like, okay, let's go. And same thing, my brain's like, absolutely not. This is a non-starter. And my mouth just says, okay. And my feet walk me into my dad's car. And we get there, and the same thing is happening. The intake guy is talking about stuff, and my brain is just fighting him, and my mouth is just saying, yes. All right, maybe the first example of God doing for me what I could not do for myself. I get into this outpatient treatment thing. It's Monday through Thursday from like 5 p.m. until 10 p.m. And I go back to my original home group, which was the 5:15 happy hour. See Susan back there? And there was a guy I had met those first 90 days who was also kind of an aging punk rocker who spoke in unnecessarily highbrow academic terms. And so I identified with that guy, and I asked him to sponsor me, and he said, absolutely, as soon as you're done with treatment, call me. And I'm so glad he said that. Because the stuff they were talking about in treatment, while a 12-step based treatment center, was not quite the same way they were talking about stuff in AA. So I got to do the treatment thing of like really shoving my nose in all the bad choices I'd made, and really like, this is what it means to be an alcoholic, and this is what you've done to your family, and they're in the room, and now they get to talk to you, and I'm freaking out, right? But then they're like, now you need to go to 7 meetings a week. And I went to 213 meetings in my first 90 days. I didn't know what else to do. That's not a brag. I was like, if I'm not at work, asleep, or at a meeting, I'm going to drink. And so I'm getting the hard sell from the treatment center, and I'm going to AA meetings, and people are just like, life's pretty good now, Like they didn't seem that congruent to me. But I get out of treatment, and my sponsor's like, okay, let's go. And I had sort of the second moment of clarity that I got early in sobriety was like, this is your last chance to be good at something. And not in like an egotistical way. I don't know if you guys know about wanting to be good at stuff when you were still drinking. And it didn't usually pan out because it's hard to be good at stuff when you're drunk all the time. Or you just quit doing it altogether, because what's the point? And I was like, this may be your last chance to really try at something. So I start meeting with Clyde. We meet once a week. We just write out of the book. We were reading the book together. When we got to a step, we did it. And that's the way I take my guys through it now. It worked for me. It seems to be working for them. And I got, other than some monetary kind of amends, I was through the steps more or less by the time I was about 6 months sober. And like the big things I remember from the step work was when I was done with my fifth step, my sponsor was like, well, do you feel better? And I was like, no. Because now someone knows all of it, like this is terrible. I thought I had done a good job of hiding all this stuff. And I didn't have any like really gnarly. It was just anyone who sat through a fifth step, they're all the same. We do all the same dumb shit. And then getting into amends, those went pretty well with the exception of the one I made with my ex-wife. I thought the only thing we weren't going to talk about was money, and that was the only thing she wanted to talk about. And that we were not on the same page there at all. And I talked to my sponsor, and I talked to Jared, and I talked to Jared's sponsor, and all these people, and they're like, no, like you need to do what you think is best, man, but you don't need to do anything beyond that. And it was great direction from these men who'd been sober for 5 or 10 or 15 years of like, you got to clean up your side of the street, and that's the rule. That AA doesn't ask any more of you than that, right? So I had to go back and have a hard conversation still and try and keep it in the nature of an amends of like, this is the way I see it. What do you think about this dollar amount? And she agreed to that, and I finished making those amends payments about 3 months ago. Like, it took a long time. After I'm through the steps, and I had a couple people ask me to sponsor. I'm at about 9 months sober, and I'm like, I've finished the steps 3 months ago. Do you might want to ask someone else? And they're like, yeah, I might want to ask someone else, and they all did. But I noticed it wasn't big things changing, but I remember going to bed one night, and I was like, I didn't count what day of sobriety this is today. Like I'm just doing it. And I didn't really think about having a drink today. And the biggest thing, this is silly, but it was important to me then, I had moved, from the time I got back from New Jersey, I had pretty much stopped opening my mail. And I had this big 24 by 24 by 12 inch box that was just full of 5 years of backlog of unopened mail. And one night I got home from work to my crappy little apartment downtown that I was living at, and I opened the crappy little door that had been broken into 100 times to get my 2 or 3 bills and junk mail things out of there. And I went to throw them in the box, and I was like, you know what, man, just open it. And I was up until 4 a.m. going through all of that mail. Most of it went in the garbage can. Some of it was financial record stuff. And because I went to law school, I was like, well, I've got to file this for 7 years. But I stayed up and I did it. And there's that one of the 9 step promises is fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. And when I woke up the next morning, I was like, well, the economic insecurity is still there. But maybe the fear is gone a little bit. I will at least look at my bank statement. I didn't learn anything. I knew I was broke, out of money, living paycheck to paycheck, and it was just a lot of that anxiety and apprehension about how I was I going to be able to afford to do this stuff was gone. It just had disappeared. So yeah, I'm still doing the service commitment thing at that point. At the 5:15, it was just chairing, making coffee, whatever it was. 18 months. I'm starting to get a little more serious about AA. I've taken a guy through the steps. I'm starting to get opinions about how AA should be run, which was great. And I go to City at 7. I'd be kind of bouncing around Saturday nights just wherever friends were going. I go to City at 7, and it's always been a big treatment center meeting. And it used to be, it was a call-on meeting until 7:45. And then the last 15 minutes, they'd open it up. 7:45, this kid bounces out of his seat and goes trotting up there, and he's wearing MC Hammer pants and an ankle monitor. And he gets up to the podium and he goes, yo, I'm going to rap my share. And one of the home group members in the front row goes, nope. And I was like, no? Someone in AA said no, And she's like, that's not what we're doing here. Sit down. And I was like, this is my new home group. This is it, right? I still love the 5:15 meeting. It was just, at this point, I'm like, I probably should stay at work until 5, So I made that my home group and almost immediately became the GSR for that group. And once my GSR term was done, I was the grapevine chair for District 2 for a while, and I think it was the treasurer for city. I've been in service since I got sober. And it's kept me at meetings, and it's kept me at regular meetings, and I'm not an anonymous person in AA, right? I have friends and people I know who, when I miss a meeting more than 2 or 3 weeks in a row, they call me to see how I'm doing, right? And that getting into that GSR commitment at City at 7 was the beginning of that. This is a 2-year thing. You got to go to Price or God knows where to sit through this stuff. And that stuff ended up being really cool. Like, you find out, Utah in some ways is a pretty diverse place, right? And finding out that whether you're from Salt Lake or Park City or Tremonton or Hurricane, we're all still doing AA, right? We're all doing the same stuff. And that kind of put a little bit of spring in my step with how I was looking at the program, right? Like, it's not just bigger than me, it's bigger than my home group, it's bigger than Salt Lake. Like, I'm seeing it on a regional level now. And then the third sort of moment of clarity thing I want to talk about here, and then we can speed through the end. Some of you in here might remember a gal named Karen. What's Karen's last name, Nick? Do you remember? I can't believe I'm forgetting it now. Thank you. Karen Hendrickson. Karen was tall and beautiful and gentle and warm and kind. And she had 4 or 5 years of sobriety when I came in. And from my perspective, she was in the center of AA in Salt Lake City. She had a sponsor, she was going to meetings, she had service commitments, she was sponsoring other women. And I had a big crush on her. And she committed suicide right after I picked up a 2-year chip. And for those of us who were friends with her, which was a lot of people, it really turned a lot of things upside down. And I remember as I'm processing this grief stuff, I'm having this argument with God on the way up to her viewing. My band had been tracking some new songs that day, and one of the songs was about a friend of our singers who had committed suicide, so I was just a mess all day, right? And so I'm driving up to the viewing, and I'm having this argument with my higher power, which had come to me, the ability to speak openly out loud to God. Like, I kind of skipped that part of my early recovery, but it came in there somewhere, despite my best efforts. But this was a big one for me. I'm like, I'm not just going to do the prayers out of the book. Like, I was pissed, This girl's doing everything she's supposed to do, and she still took herself out. What's the point of doing any of this if that's the end of the road, And I was really upset. And in my Subaru, this was before I had the Bluetooth connection in my car. I had an iPod that plugged in to the stereo unit, which was about as good as it got in 2011. And I'm like, okay, whatever, say this angry prayer, I need a sign. I know I'm not entitled to ask for signs, but sober James needs it. And I hang up with God, and I hit shuffle on my iPod. My iPod is 76 gigabytes of punk rock and 4 gigabytes of miscellaneous. And the first song that plays is Beethoven's Hallelujah Chorus. And I said, skip. A little on the nose, God. The next song that played was We'll Meet Again by Johnny Cash. And I was like, well, I can listen to Johnny Cash, right? And I had this thought of, you asked God for something and you immediately got an answer. You can choose from this point forward in your life to either view these kinds of things as coincidences or that you have a higher power that is working personally in your life. And luckily, I chose option number 2. It didn't really make losing my friend that much easier, but something shifted. While I was at the funeral, I saw all of the other people who were there and knew that we were going through the same thing. Or when I'd lost friends before, it was just poor James, I've tried to take that little lesson and put it into the rest of my sobriety. I can have ideas about how my home group should be. I do have ideas about how my home group should be run. Or about what we should vote on when we're talking about the general service items, or how my sponsees should be spending their time, or how many times they can blow me off before I fire them. I fired 2 guys in 10 years, What I find is the more that I try to get out of my own way and just, when a door opens, walk through it, it's given me a pretty good life. Another one of those promises is this, that we'll have a life beyond our wildest dreams. I thought that meant money and private jets and twins, you know? That's not what it means for me now. Like, I used to not be able to look at myself in the mirror. That's a common sentiment I hear at 12-step meetings, right? I remember being at a party and it was everything I could do not to punch the mirror in someone else's parents' house. And like just that's enough on a lot of days to be able to wake up and get out of bed and, you know, go in the bathroom and turn the shower on and not have to avert my gaze, you know? I can just walk in there and do what I need to do. It hasn't been a steady incline though, right? Life has been up and down, but it's generally moving up. And the stuff that's hit along the way, these last 2 years, like between year 2 and year 7.5, a lot of things happened, but none of them were really that memorable as far as an AA share is concerned. You know, I got into a serious romantic relationship. I bought a house. Lots of good stuff, right? The relationship didn't work out. But these last 2 years, my family's taken a lot of hits, right? My 11-year-old niece got hit and killed by a car. The relationship ended. My house flooded. I got hit by a drunk driver while I was on my Harley. A sponsee of mine relapsed and overdosed and died. It's just like, it's just funerals sprinkled throughout the whole thing, right? Whether it's other people who were in AA or people who maybe should have been, or just, you know, people that got old and moved on. There's been a lot of stuff that I would have absolutely sent me into a tailspin, certainly before I got sober and maybe in those first 2 years. I'm finding now, going back to that feeling of driving up to that viewing of like, you can look at this as coincidence or there's a higher power in your life, is like, if I'm going to do the higher power thing, like I got to show up this way, right? I got to do what the book suggests that I do. And I can try and show up and still be kind and helpful and help carry people through the things that they're going. Because when my niece died, it wasn't just me, right? It was my sister and her husband and my nieces and nephews and my brother and my parents. And there was like 1,000 people at her funeral, you know? 1,000 people. It was ridiculous. When I'm trying to move through the sticky spots that way, I find that same moment as the car ride up to the funeral of like, this is probably going to be okay. And you can do this by helping other people get through it. It's the same way I try and sponsor guys, and it's the same way I try and show up as an employee and a son and a brother and all that other stuff now. The last thing I wanted to touch on, and then I'll wrap up here. I went through the steps again, formally for the 3rd time, I think, last fall and into the winter. And when we got to 6 and 7, my sponsor was like, I really want you to try to put more into 6 and 7 this go around. And I was like, okay. And I got home and I'm reading the instructions and I'm like, well, I guess I can put the book up higher on a shelf and take it down from there. And I can more loudly ask for this stuff to be taken from me. I'm like, I don't know how to do this harder. And he's like, I called him and he's like, it's not about doing it harder, man. He's like, spend some time on it. Don't do it in an hour this time. Like, we're going to move on to 8 and 9, but work this into your daily routine. Man, that has changed my life. It's not a huge thing where like the sun is coming up in the west now, but just like really trying to reinforce that idea of like, I don't know what's going on. Take all of it. And whatever direction I'm supposed to go, make it as easy as possible because I am still an idiot, you know? That's working. And it is really that kind of brash. I'm not trying to oversell what my prayers look like in the morning, you know? It's really reinforced for me everything that has been given to me as a result of a relationship with a higher power and working the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and staying active in the fellowship of AA. Like, as all these other little areas of my life are shifting or burning down or growing or whatever it is, like I still have this vibe in here, this energy that's moving around, and I can tap into it whenever I want. And that's not the way it is out there. Like some days work sucks, right? And some days the family vibe is hard. And whatever it is, like breaking up with someone is very difficult. There's not always stuff to draw in that unless I'm doing it this way, right? I can find a way to go to bed without thinking about taking a drink. And it's been a long time since I've really thought about taking a drink. Going back to that thing of like living a life beyond your wildest dreams, now it's not just being comfortable, right? That was beyond my wildest dreams. To be happy with who I am and where I am, the amount of money I have and the things that I have managed to accumulate and can like take care of, the relationships I can nurture. Like that wasn't even on my radar before I got sober. I was just looking for the next thing that was going to keep me stoked for 6 hours. This living a life in sobriety, trying to just work through my little route in the universe is incredibly satisfying. I know it's something that new in sobriety. You could have told me that for 4 hours, done a PhD dissertation on it, and I would have just been like, yeah, okay, it wouldn't have made any sense. But when you get into it, it is a life beyond your wildest dreams. Like I don't know how else you could phrase it. So I'm so grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous for giving me that, and I don't know. Thanks for having me tonight.